Welcome. I'm David Brooker, and you're listening to the Old Soul podcast, exploring spirituality and life. For the past 45 years, I've been actively engaged in Christian ministry, working at what is often described as the progressive end of the theological spectrum. Energized and intrigued by the wonder of creation, by the diversity of humanity, by the mysteries of life, and by a pervading sense of connection with that which is beyond me, something that stirs my soul, something bigger than me. In my retirement, I remain committed to rigorous theological and biblical scholarship, open to new ideas and enthusiastic about dialogue with those who live at different points on the Christian theological spectrum, and with those who live within different faith traditions. You'll find that diversity represented within my presentations. I began writing a blog primarily to sustain and kindle my own ongoing thought and practice. But I've been encouraged to share these ramblings from the cobwebs of my mind with a wider audience. And I count it a privilege that you may be interested in reading and or listening to my material. I look forward to your feedback. I hope you might even choose to subscribe to my site at www.oldsoul.blog. Thank you for checking it out. Now let's get into this week's episode. Welcome again to the Old Soul podcast. I'm David Brooker, and this is episode 3, entitled Navigating the Times, Courage and Hope. We begin today's episode with some words from the Gospel of Luke, chapter 21, verses 25 to 28, where we read, "There will be portents in the sun and moon and stars, and on the earth nations will be dismayed in their confusion at the roar of the surging sea. People will faint from terror at the prospect of what is coming over the civilized world, for the heavenly forces will be shaken. When these things begin to happen, stand tall and hold your heads high, because your deliverance is just around the corner." Well, there's no shortage of doomsayers in our world, people who are all too ready to proclaim the end of life as we know it, harbingers of cataclysmic disaster, prophets of gloom and doom. Maybe such despondency is understandable given the problems that assail us. Conflicts and wars, violence and crime, economic uncertainty, climate confusion. To my mind, climate confusion captures the unpredictability of the seasons better than climate change. The signs of our times are hard to miss, and that excerpt from Luke's Gospel does seem to capture our present predicament. Incidentally, I'm recording this podcast in the hours following the attempted assassination of Donald Trump, an event that, no matter where you sit on the political spectrum, is an affront to both the democratic principles and the moral values of our society. Ironically, it's also shockingly illustrative of the tenor of that passage from Luke's Gospel, bringing into stark relief the choice that confronts us as we determine our response to horrors such as that. Why is it, do you think, that when we hear passages such as these from the Scripture or read parallel stories in our contemporary news services, that we tend to go to dark and foreboding places, to expect the worst, to see these portents as signs of the end? Well, I wonder if it's at least partly due to that rather bizarre Christian tradition, in which many of us are steeped, that holds to an expectation that the world as we know it is going to be blown away by a cosmic disaster that will trigger the triumphant return of Jesus. And we faithful few, having been saved from the disaster, will be swept up to paradise, leaving the unfaithful masses to fend for themselves in the mess they have created. You're probably familiar with this so-called theology, and you may even be aware of the propensity of some to hasten the disaster in order to also hasten the rescue. Well, if that's where you go when you hear or read of such signs, I urge you to cast the image from your mind, because such thinking is neither Christian nor healthy. A quick sidebar on the text I quoted from Luke. The translation I used comes from a book entitled The Five Gospels, a book that was the result of many years of study and discussion by a large team of scholars meeting as the Jesus Seminar. One of the products of their collaboration was a consensus around the sayings that might confidently be attributed to Jesus and those that are more likely the result of later editing by the Gospel writers. In fact, they devised a colour-coded scale for the words attributed to Jesus, where red means Jesus definitely said this, pink means Jesus probably said this, grey means Jesus probably didn't say this, but it may represent his thinking, and black means Jesus definitely did not say this. Interestingly, the passage I read is printed in black. Jesus did not say this, meaning that it has been inserted by the writer. So when we read it, rather than ask, what is the teaching of Jesus here, we do better to ask, what is the intention of the writer? On that basis, the context is important. The Gospels were written in the shadow of the year 70 CE. The armies of Rome had put down a bubbling Jewish rebellion with a violent march through the territory and the horrifying destruction of the temple in Jerusalem. You see, the terror to which this passage points is not a future event for the first readers, it's their present reality. And the key to the intent of the passage comes not in the doom of verses 25 and 26, but in the hope of verse 28. When these things begin to happen, stand tall and hold your heads high, because your deliverance is just around the corner. To a people living in fear and foreboding, Luke writes a message of courage and hope, a call to perseverance and action. Here then is my take on how we might respond constructively to the all too evident signs of destruction and despair that assail us. Rather than throw up our hands in hopeless or helpless resignation, we are invited to look beyond the signs of destruction, to the signs of hope and courage that are also always evident, even if they take a little more seeking. Don't be afraid or numbed into passivity because of the terrible things that may happen. Rather take courage and be hopeful, because despite the things that threaten us, climate confusion and energy crisis, COVID and other viruses, greed and corruption in politics and commerce, tension between superpowers, etc., etc. Despite all these signs, all over the world there are people of goodwill and genuine concern offering alternative signs. signs of kindness and compassion, of generosity and philanthropy, of service and care. And in those signs is our hope. Furthermore, this hope is not mere wishful thinking. It's not like, I hope the weather is okay, or I hope my footy team wins, or I hope the kids turn out okay. And nor is it passive. Let's sit back and hope that God or someone else will save us. Rather, it is an active hope. It's a choice we make about how we are going to live. Because what we choose will determine how we act. And how we act will determine how we live. And how we live will determine the sort of world we build together. Want a world that lives in peace? Then choose to live peaceably in your places of family, work and recreation, and you will help make it so. Long for a world in which climate is stable and sustainable? Then make choices now to create that reality. Hope for reconciliation with First Nations peoples, or amongst angry protest groups, or within your workplace? Then be an agent of reconciliation in your networks and your neighbourhoods. What does your soul hope for? Don't just sit waiting for it to appear. Live as though it were already a reality, because in doing that, you make it real. Here's the key. Interpret the hopes and aspirations that arise within you, not as mere wishful thinking, as pie-in-the-sky dreams, but rather as the promptings of the Spirit of creation regarding the things about which you care, about which you can make choices, about which you can make a difference, about which you can take action. Such is the hope reflected in the well-known and inspirational quote from Robert F. Kennedy.
Some men see things as they are and say, why? I dream things that never were and say, why not?
May we begin every day by gazing out upon the world and making a commitment to take courage, to affirm hope, and to ask why not. Because the truth is that there really are enough people of goodwill and generous intention in the world to ensure the well-being of all creation. Let us determine to be numbered amongst them and to live and act accordingly. Thank you. Well, that's it for this podcast. Thanks for sticking it out to the end. I do hope you found it worthwhile. Incidentally, if you prefer to read rather than listen, you can find the text of this podcast, along with a host of other resources, at www.oldsoul.blog. And do subscribe if you would like to be notified of future presentations. This is David Brooker, and I look forward to catching you next time.